Xanadu Review. As always, I'm your host, PJ Anders. And today I have a writer and somebody I have affectionately called a shitpost sommelier from Substack, who goes by the moniker of Dudley Newright. And Dudley writes the Newright Post, and also the Newright Post podcast. So if Dudley, you want to tell the audience a little bit more about yourself, and we'll jump into it.
Yeah, so I've been doing the Post for, I guess, 3.5 years now. It is a collection every week of the most interesting and funny content coming out of the quote-unquote New Right, which is a loose coalition of various people of a right-wing persuasion. We can get into the specifics of what it actually means politically, but yeah, it's the podcast episodes, tweets, Substack essays that I think are the most interesting or funny every week as a newsletter, and that's kind of my main project. I occasionally do original writing myself, but for the most part, I'm a curator and aggregator of content.
No, it's as somebody like myself who doesn't really use Twitter. I made one for about I don't know, 4 to 6 month period. I never really used it to try to promote this Substack, but just it's a little bit of a cesspool these days. So I definitely appreciate the fact that you go out there and kind of wade through the muck for those of us who don't want to go on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm actually consistently given that feedback that there's folks on Substack who, for whatever reason, do not want to be on Twitter. There's some good reasons for that. And so this is a way for them to kind of keep track of the discourse or see the funniest highlights without actually having to give their soul over to doom scrolling Twitter for hours on end like I do.
Yeah, well, at least in my case, I never really had Twitter. Well, I think I technically got it like when it first came out, but that's when it was just, the old joke used to be like, oh, it's just celebrities posting what they had for lunch. And that's kind of what it was at the time. I was like, I don't really get it. And I never really followed up. And then I started doing Substack like about 2 years ago now. And, I tried to do it to promote it, but now, you feel kind of like the smallest puppy who can't find a nipple, so to speak.
Yeah. It's it took me a while to get the traction I needed to make Twitter worth my while. But I will say this in its favor, that it just moves really fast, and it definitely in terms of like its sense of humor, I think it's at a higher caliber than Substack. Substack's got more interesting long form content, obviously, but I don't think you can really replicate the kind of frenzied banter that you see on Twitter and Substack notes. At least I just haven't seen it reach those levels.
Yeah, for better or for worse. I try to, since my notes do decently well on Substack for the size of the platform, but I kind of feel like I'd be the proverbial, like, the kid who's hot shit in high school going to the college. Like, okay, I do well for Substack, but for Twitter, I'm really nothing. And, it's I'm sure if I, put in my 10,000 hours or whatever it is, I could get somewhere with it. But I don't know. It's like you said, for better or for worse, it is a very fast moving conversation.
It's a lot harder to gain traction with reasonable centrism. I mean, I don't know if you would call yourself that, but I found that the more incendiary fringe content is the stuff that makes you build an audience.
Well, I mean, you definitely have called me the C word before, but you're not the only one on Substack. And I don't know. I was thinking about how I wanted to broach this subject and talking about the political and social landscape more broadly. Like, at least for me, me personally, like there's aspects of what you do in the New Right more broadly that appeals to me. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But I definitely am not like, a committed partisan. I think, I like to say, like, if you consider right-wing views, red, and, left-wing views blue, like I have some views that could be considered far right, some that are far left, and you were to, like, blend them all up, it would be kind of an off purple color. So in that
Mhm.
sense, but I'm not very rarely. I'm like, well, guys, let's just meet in the middle and find a sensible compromise. It's okay. This works from this, that works from that. Let's take what works and leave what doesn't. But I think I've kind of hit that wall on Substack as well, just because there there is a bit of an audience for more so I identified with like the heterodox label back when that was in vogue, but I think people for the most part they want their red or blue content.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. You look at the leaderboards, and it's either the screaming libs or the
Mhm.
equivalent on the right that really dominate. I'm always shocked when I look at the leaderboards because I realize that there's this whole other world out there that I have no exposure to. Otherwise, my filter bubble is
Mhm.
airtight on Substack,
The
and I guess
anti-Trump flop.
yeah, yeah. I mean, Twitter is different because all the hardcore lib posters left for Blue Sky.
Hmm.
And they're kind of starting to trickle back, but a lot of people say that it was more fun when they were around because you would have more back and forth and opportunities to banter and troll people. But yeah, it's different.
Mm. So I guess that one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, I think that kind of leads into it pretty well, since you seem like somebody who has their pulse, their finger to the pulse of, the quote unquote new right. And I guess if you want to first, new right or dissident right, first I want to, what does that mean to you out of curiosity? Since just for context for you and, maybe the audience, since I don't always come out directly and say it, like around, I think it was a little bit before 2020 or maybe right around then, like I remember I saw like, I don't know if you've seen like the political compass memes and that whole
Yeah.
subgenre. I remember seeing somebody saying, oh, I'm a monarchist. And I thought, that's not true. You're just trying to be like the edgy thing, like, oh, I'm not a Nazi. I'm one thing worse. I was like, okay, that's not real. You're just joking. And then, someone's like, oh no, I'm real. I'm really a monarchist. There's this guy. I don't know if Yarvin had doxed himself at that time, but Yarvin Mencius Moldbug. I was like, wait, what? Really? And then, I just kind of went down that rabbit hole of Yarvin and some of those dissident right thinkers, maybe a little behind the curve to some, maybe a little ahead for others. And it's a lot of stuff that I found interesting. Some of it I think really has merit. Some of it was just kind of an intellectual curiosity. Like the main thing being like, getting over the almost borderline religious attachment to the concept of democracy. Um, but without getting too into details of like, my every, specific piece of, my esoteric political background and, manifesto, so to speak. I'm wondering like what it means to you historically and kind of where it's going now. Cause it felt like the new right kind of had a moment, in the same way that like I was a part of like the Dirtbag left, Chapo Trap House, Brethren of Bernard back in the day. And it felt like kind of where that movement was in like 2020, early 2021 is kind of where the new right is right now with the second Trump's victory and by many people from what I read on from their account in the new right being pretty disappointed in Trump. Where kind of where it's going now. So sorry, that's a lot to throw out at you, but that's kind of the question.
Sure. Now, there's a couple of different ways of framing it. One would be to discuss its, core ideological pillars, which you might say is economic populism as opposed to the free market. That's, adherence to the free market that is at least in theory dominated the right in the U.S. And in the West more generally, and then nationalism and borders, and then a cultural conservatism that was a reaction to wokeness. Um, I think it's more interesting to just position it as a reaction against liberalism more broadly. The flattening of hierarchies and the erasing of distinctions. Um, And I think that a lot of people see what the woke trend did over the last 15, or I guess almost 15 years,
Hmm.
and how sad and humorless and homogenizing and kind of unfun that it was, and so a lot of it is boils down to a kind of humorous reaction against that. That was certainly my entry point. It was kind of, I was noticing that these were the people online who were having more fun, and um, in a way that felt like that had been kind of sucked out of my lived experience offline. And so I think it's as much of a cultural shift away from dowdy boomer conservatives that want you to read the Federalist Papers, uh, as much as it is like a coherent ideology. And as a result, a lot of the people who make up the New Right believe in very different things, other than this generalized aversion to the liberal project. Some of them are, urban hipster dime square people in downtown New York, and some of them are kind of ultra trad, natalists who live out in the hinterland, and then you've got oddballs of every stripe in between. Um, but yeah, is that like the kind of an umbrella definition that you're looking for?
I just wanted to know what it meant to you.
Yeah, I mean that's basically it. For me personally, I think that what it attracts me to it is that it's not trying to pander or please the liberal in your head. I feel like there was a tendency among American Republicans to want to seem cool or down with it, which resulted
Hmm.
in a lot of libertarianism. Yeah, I think, personally speaking, a lot of guys, myself included, were libertarian and sort of realized that a lot of that was an attempt to kind of be conservative without offending the broader mainstream culture. Um, and I didn't want people to think that I was like thought abortion was bad. I wouldn't want to scare the hose in that way. But the new right, I think, is a little bit more like out and proud in a way that would scare libs, and that I find that refreshing.
Yeah, and that's definitely what kind of drew me to it initially as well. I mean, this was the tail end of the Biden administration. I think the wave of woke had kind of crested at that point, but and there does seem to be like a concerted effort to like gaslight about that era right now, which I think is very funny. But at the same time, like I understand why they're doing it from a strategic standpoint, but it's something that definitely appealed to me just because part of like the Yarvin thing was like getting over, or rather like not seeing liberalism as this um universal good in and of itself that was just the Fukuyamaist end of history point. um and that's something that definitely attracted me and continues to attract to me. Like I'm not as hung up on like a democracy as an end goal in and of itself. I don't necessarily think it's the best thing. um but again, like I think we are in that point, like if nothing else, like for me, are you familiar with the work of somebody like Philip Pilkington? He does the Multipolarity podcast.
No, I'm not.
He's you should check him out. He's on Substack. I think you'd like him a lot since I think he's a more conservative leaning guy who does an economics and geopolitics podcast that is kind of where I kind of my go-to for some of this stuff. But in any case, he's like a lot of these guys, like the post-liberal is the term they use, since it seems like it's not like a discussion of like, oh, is liberalism good, is liberalism bad, um should we keep doing it, is it a or should we do something else. Like it seems like it's just kind of reached the end of its rope, and now we're figuring out what happens next. it seems to be the kind of the moment we're in as a country. I mostly almost exclusively speak about the United States because that's where I live and that's where I understand. But we have two different factions broadly who seem to be like trying to offer up what's coming next, and it seems like the dissident right, new right, is definitely like represented at least in one of those factions.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on who you ask whether the dissident right is on the rise or on the decline. A lot of people feel that this current bifurcation happening right now, post October 7th and post Charlie Kirk, has seen this fragmentation where roughly breaks down between people who are in support of Trump and have left their support of Trump. And so, I don't really have a strong opinion on that other than I often find myself somewhere in the middle of that particular debate. And I wish that people could find a way to get along and not see each other as enemies. But
you're a sensible centrist of the new right.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think tactically it's a good idea, but I also think that it's the reasonable way to be. I find that a lot of the slavish devotion to Trump to be distasteful, but I see people posting like Iran flags in their bio to basically they hate America so much that they're allying with Iran, which seems silly to me. But there's people on both sides of that argument that are a lot smarter and more well read in history than I am, and so I often don't try to like inject my own personal opinion into those debates, but I do try to collect the best and perspectives and showcase.
I think
I have a big tent kind of cornucopia of opinions within the new right.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason you have an appeal is you can bring in these different perspectives. Within you obviously have your range that you want to do it of being right leaning, but it's something that somebody like me who is a former Bernie voter can at least say I don't necessarily agree with everything, but I at least until fairly recently I felt like it was easier to have a conversation when I disagreed with somebody on the right than when I disagreed with somebody on the left. All that's kind of changed kind of around that time that you were mentioning. At least for me, I'll say like cards on the table, like I was like a Bernie Sanders guy. Like a lot of people became very disillusioned when Bernie Sanders got screwed over since, other than the cultural conservatism thing, like when you were describing, what you saw as the new right, like most of that would not be, really, I think too, if you'll pardon the pun, too left field for a lot of people who liked Bernie Sanders. That his line about open borders being a Koch brothers plot, for example. And then I just I just didn't vote in 2024 since, pretty much, not to toot my own horn, but kind of what happened with Trump and Iran is kind of what I thought was going to happen. And, I'm curious your opinion on him. I'm so on Tucker Carlson, and I lean towards him just being a slot merchant at this point, but he said something to the effect of like Donald Trump's actions with Iran is probably one of the most damaging things an American president has ever done to the United States. And I would tend to agree with that since that's, that was his whole thing is speaking out against, being the Republican who could break from the orthodoxy and criticize all these wars we were getting into in the Middle East. And then he just turns around and does the same thing. So, and not to make this a referendum on Trump, because I'm almost not super interested in him as a figure, but just for an example for me, for somebody who's more of an independent, like that was, that's kind of where I fall on that. So I see why a lot of people feel very betrayed by it.
Yeah, I do too. I personally, was enthusiastic about the idea of him being a break from that trend. And, it'll be interesting to see where things go when he's gone. Um, like if he'll swing back toward what people's idea of Trump was. It's sort of up for debate whether, and a lot of people have pulled up old quotes of him basically saying like, yeah, we should attack Iran. So it's not like he was being a hypocrite when he did it. But I mean, I think it's correct to say that a lot of people were enthusiastic about him because he seemed to have less of an interest in global adventuring in, conflict zones and creating conflict zones. And but yeah, I think where I tend to land, along with a lot of the new right, is basically that the other stuff that he seems to be generally right on is too important to abandon him over, like immigration being the number one thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, continuing the ongoing neocon stuff, I would say is like almost enough, but not quite for me.
Yeah, I mean, the problem being like, I think it's something that's so massively unpopular. It could very easily cost them 2026 and or 2028, and it all gets undone. So I think that's the danger. But again, like I'm I try to avoid like direct politics these days since I don't know. I took a break from it, and once you know it, me not paying attention to the news had the exact same effect on the outcome as me paying attention to the news.
Yeah.
So I try to follow it a little bit more in broad strokes these days, especially what's going on with Iran. By the time this is recorded, they might have changed their minds again, and it's to follow the day to day is probably a mistake. I do think in some ways, like I understand why people felt betrayed, and there's some people who are definitely very smug about it, which I don't care for. Since say what you will about Trump, the first term, he didn't start any new wars, so it wasn't, I think, totally unreasonable to expect that he would not do that. That having been said, like I think like even if you think of like Animal Farm, there's a lot of different interpretations, but like one of the main ones to me is like um with the animals, or like the Lenin and Stalin, like the going on to do some of the same things that the Tsar and whoever did. Like there's certain realities to power, and there's certain realities to being a state, and like this whole thing with Iran goes back much, much, much further. And if you count, like, if you look at America as the continuation of the British Empire, like, even much, much further than like the 50s and 60s. So it's a long con type of thing. And I think maybe some of the realities of geopolitics in the office are probably like, hitting him in ways that he didn't expect, if I had to venture a guess.
Yeah. I tend to be pretty white pilled in general, and it has little to do with what's happening in electoral politics or geopolitics. And it's more to do with the kind of stuff that I cover in the post, which is the culture
Mm-hmm.
and the vibrant environment that we now have for right leaning folks, which didn't exist a decade ago. And I don't think young guys who are a part of this scene now realize how bad it was when I was in college and coming up, and how just there was really no environment to be able to express anything like these ideas that we're seeing mainstream now.
Mm-hmm.
And also just how much more fun it is now to be able to speak honestly and openly, and to have and even to make it all a joke. I find that is much more important in the long run than whether some politician wins an election or not. I just feel like there are people talking about things now that were just completely not on the table 10, 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So you're solidly in politics is downstream of culture camp.
Yeah. It doesn't mean
So,
politics doesn't matter. I just think that there's like a groundswell that will have a flywheel effect
mhm.
once it reaches a certain velocity uh, that's going to rocket us into a debased world eventually.
So why don't you talk a little bit about that, since the cultural stuff is kind of what I'm more interested in these days as well. I'm trying to do cultural commentary and fiction and stuff like that, since, despite what I was just talking about, I try not to get too into the nitty gritty of wonkery, since I don't know, that's kind of boring. But that having been said, I do have one more wonky thing as a framing question, kind of framing device for that question, since I was thinking about that, since I'm kind of a history buff, and that's part of what I read about. And I think whatever, whatever you want to call it, I would say like wokeness is kind of the logical endpoint of liberalism, like the FDR revolution. But I think that was maybe it's using kind of Marxist or Hegelian framing, I guess you could say. But like the material conditions of liberalism were created by like globalism and where the United States was in the world, and like it was these global markets that were created with Europe, and then the post World War II and post Cold War, all that. That seems to be kind of, as I was saying earlier, collapsing, and it feels like a more national identity and regional and friendshoring and all that stuff is just kind of happening whether we want it to or not. So I think like a lot of the more localized and smaller and nationalistic thing is kind of going to happen, and the culture is probably going to follow that because that's just where the incentive structures are going to lead us. So I tend to agree with you in a roundabout way. I don't know what that version is going to look like. And I'm kind of just watching at this point. I don't even know what direction it's going to go, but what makes you more hopeful towards the right wing, the based side, as you would say?
Sorry, I was on mute there. I think that there's just, guys out there talking to each other and building support networks. And uh, I will say that I like, if you were in your 20s in the 2000s, like I was, uh, it felt very lonely. And now it doesn't anymore. It feels like, you see people on your TV screen or your laptop screen, I guess, and even out and about, that like you might see a MAGA hat, and it's just people are more open about having these ideas, and they are. I think we have a kind of we're building blueprints for functional society, and it's obvious that there's a pipeline now between like this Twitter sphere and the levers of power. I'm not saying that people on Twitter can make stuff happen directly in the legislation and so on, but it's clear that there are people in the administration who are listening to these accounts, and I've been told by people who work in the administration that that's the case. So I think that it's the culture is shifting. Like young men actually care about raising healthy families and working out and looking good and being healthy and wanting to make like a pro-social change in their community. I don't feel like anybody was talking about this when I was in my 20s. I go to the gym now, and there's just like a lot of like good looking young healthy guys, and that's a big shift. um I think that there was like gym rats back then, but now it's like very mainstream to just be in good health and to lift heavy. And I think that natalism is something that's like people are wanting to have big families. They're wanting to advocate for economic policies that are going to help toward that end. We've got conferences now for these things. And, just the chatter that I'm seeing, I think is what's important. The fact that these conversations are just happening at all. So I think that based world is, when I use that term, I was referring more to like something established in society, but it could also just be a based world of your own imagination, where if you're living in a community where there's high trust and your neighbors and you're all kind of living well together and helping each other out, like I think that's the goal of this whole thing. And so like I feel like people are aiming for that more than they were 20 years ago, where I feel like the average Republican back then was just like, well, my job is to advocate for low taxes and so that we can start businesses. And it's not that that stuff's not important. You could argue about whether or not low taxes is actually good for small businesses in the long term or not. But I think that people are just more conscious. To borrow a term from the left, they're more woke to the conditions that make them suffer, and I think they're keying in on solutions that might actually help. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a cultural change even I've noticed, and I think you've doxed yourself other than very vaguely say you live in a big blue city, and I do as well. And I felt like, and I felt like I had the feeling Trump was going to get reelected partially for the reason you said. I saw people in MAGA hats and like nobody losing their shit. Um, but I do feel like there is somewhat of a cultural shift towards maybe that boomer mentality of countercultural, I don't know, anti-normalcy, I guess you could say. Um,
Mhm.
it's not it's not as aspirational as it used to be. Did you see that diner goth core thing, whatever it was, a
Oh yeah.
couple months ago? It feels to me like the fact that to me the takeaway was the fact that your Walgreens cashier is like a non-binary furry probably is an indicator. Like on one level, somebody might be like, oh, it's even affected the hinterlands. But the fact that it is in the hinterlands with, the normies makes it not very high status anymore. And it seems like there's something to be said for I know more and more people like it's a status thing to want to, oh, I want to start a family and be financially secure. And not that it's completely going away. I think it's somewhat overstated by people on the right that, that's the hot new countercultural trend. But it's definitely something that's there. And there's something that feels because the circles I run in, I run into a lot of people like that where the proverbial blue hair, theater kid, arts major, what have you. It's definitely still there, but there's something about it that feels very, very tired and very, I've described it before as like, the baby boomers' great like spiritual sickness was that they were raised on World War II mythology and they're too young to fight in World War II. I feel like
Mhm.
for millennials, ours is and for me specifically as well, like the 60s were so venerated and that was like our World War II, and we want to fight these same cultural battles that have largely been won before we were born. So there's just like a weariness to that identity. And I don't know, I definitely know a lot of people who are just having families and stuff now, whether or not it's affordable.
Yeah, I think just like you said, it's reaching its terminus when the people of Walmart have blue hair and piercings all over and whatnot. Identifying as non-binary. Um, and I think that like another trend that's really like pushing this thing forward, this new right thing, is an acknowledgement that things are worse now than they used to be. which is
Hmm.
something that you're kind of not allowed to say among liberals.
Hmm.
You're not allowed to say that my grandfather had a much better life than I do on a much more humble salary, living in uh, you know a high trust community where um, he was able to find a nice gal and get married young and live in and get a 3 bedroom home in his mid 20s and just basically like live comfortably for the rest of his years instead of having to be an Uber driver on the side of whatever your day job is, and not being able to find a suitable spouse, and just kind of living the subscription based lifestyle in a crappy apartment that you share with 3 roommates. And uh, anyway, like you're kind of not allowed to bellyache about that sort of thing among libs, and if you do, you have to like kind of blame late capitalism or something like that. And uh, certainly capitalism plays a role, and conservatives are getting more and more comfortable acknowledging that. Um, but even just to be able to say that, I think super is a real relief for young people. Young people today who are in their 20s who are just looking at the conditions that they're facing and thinking, how am I going to make this work? How does the math ain't mathin', so to speak. How am I going to have a decent, normal life? I think that's out of reach for so many. And, I think that used to be kind of left coded to say that. But now it's right coded because the whole purpose of the Democratic Party as it exists today is, you feel free to push back on
No,
me on
that.
this if you want, but
Hmm.
uh, it was the rise of this professional managerial class was to kill the side of the Democratic Party that actually thought about how the economic conditions affected the little guy, and to you know supplant that with wokeism or cultural warring. Um, and so now the right wing has kind of picked up this sword, and it's really powerful for the new right. And I think to be able to say we deserve better, you know, for what we're paying into this system, and we know we do because we all we have to do is look at how our dads lived or our grandfathers, and I think that's going to be the thing that wins elections in the coming like decade.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree 100%. And I think that's what a lot of people who are kind of in the space that I am would say, those kind of the whole, dirtbag left, your Catherine Lou's, your,
Mm-hmm.
Adolf Reed's, people like that who say the same thing. And I think that's a message that resonates with a lot of people, but um, the left seems to be very uncomfortable with saying that there was anything good about the past. Nobody was happy before 1968 or
Yeah.
1991 or 2008. Pick a date, and obviously, I don't want to downplay. There was, horrible segregation and stuff in the past, which I think, to their discredit, I think people on the right downplay, which is just kind of historically illiterate at times. But that's neither here nor there to the main point of the the cultural shift that's happening, because I think liberalism works great if everything gets better all the time materially. And kind of up until, it seems like you're maybe a little older than me, but not by much. I'm in my mid 30s, so kind of right around, when I was starting to graduate high school in 2008, it had basically always gotten better. And now that it's not, you have to have something else. And I think that's kind of what draws me to being, you know, maybe more conservative these days, because like, you can't just rely on things materially getting better and having better treats forever, you have to have like a underlying society and culture underneath it that has something deeper than just logical self-interest. If it feels good, do it. And everybody's an individual, everybody's their own truth, whatever that, I've heard it called the boomer truth regime many a time.
Mhm.
Um, and that's something that I even, on my more lefty days into this day, I still felt was very, very hollow. And I think you have to have something um, as a society to organize around other than that. And that was something that the thing that I find like the most toxic about a certain brand of leftism is it's like, and I sometimes call it like no bedtime leftism because like anything normative, like what you don't want there to be, homeless people shooting up in front of you, like what are you, some kind of fascist? It's, well,
Yeah.
if that's what being a fascist means, I guess, but I just believe, you know, normative stuff like that is I think the vast majority of people will believe is like good and normal, but there's a certain type of person who like I honestly can't even fathom that. I guess I see where it comes from, just like etymologically, if that's the right word, just where the ideology comes from. But I just have such a hard time resonating with that, and that's one of the strains that I think is just the most dangerous right now.
Yeah, I'm curious if I may ask you a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
In your travels among lefties, Bernie Bros in particular,
Hmm.
how did they respond to that for open borders as a Koch brothers proposal thing? Because it was very much like from my perspective on the right, it was like well, we're just
Hmm.
not going to talk about this, and we're going to pretend he never said that. And I mean, basically, he pretended he never said that, as you know, in his heyday when he was running for
Hmm.
president. So, did you ever encounter anyone try to like square that circle?
Um, well, I tried to square that circle. Do you want to know first kind of what I encountered and then my squaring?
Yeah, sure.
Well, first of all, like I think it's more of a, the term diversity has become kind of poison in charge, but it's a more diverse movement in ideological ecosystem than sometimes I think people on the right give it credit for. Um, but the way that was typically square, I mean, there's some people, and these are people that I never agreed with or got along with, and that caused no small amount of friction, which should probably tell you the tenor of like where the majority went. But you know, the way I squared it, and people who I liked and agreed with, is basically like, I think where Bernie Sanders was coming from is like the before the 70s leftism is like going back from like the Soviet Union to traditional labor leftism. Anybody would have recognized, if your nation is bringing in mass immigration of people who are willing to work for less, would intuitively understand that as an attack on the working class of that nation. Um, and also, that's to say nothing of how it's a brain drain for the countries that these people are coming from. It's screwing them over. It's making it harder for them to develop. Um, and it's a bad thing all around. It basically only affects these internationalist capitalists. Those are the only people who really benefit from it, other than, marginally, if you're coming from an unfortunate situation where you can make, $1 a month versus you come to America, you can make $100 a month. Sure, that's marginally better for you. Is that was kind of where I landed with it. And people like, I don't know if you follow somebody like Angela Nagel, who is more
Yeah.
of a lefty, who I'm Angela Nagel or Malcolm Cune, if you know him as well, are kind
Yeah.
of more the lane that and pre-meltdown flesh simulator. Those are kind of the lane that I occupy. Um,
And they were kind of excoriated for diverging from the pack, right?
they were. I mean, again, like this is Twitter versus like these people still have careers. They're still really pretty popular. But yeah, they
I
were
just remember like
pretty.
Angela Nagel in particular. Wasn't that the thing
I honestly
that
don't know.
there
Like I
was like
said,
a
I've never
huge
had Twitter.
kerfuffle at one point where she was kind of like informally excommunicated.
I believe
And
she's talked about that.
yeah,
But no, you're not wrong, and that's I was one of the people who said like if you're for total open borders, then like you're like an inability to confront the the deleterious effects of open borders, both for the native population as well as the immigrant population. You're playing into the hand of international capital, and then that's where identity politics came in. And I'm far from the first one to point out, around 2008 is when all the woke stuff started getting pushed because those are I think the meaningful critiques from the left of, because again, talking about how the coding of these things switch from right to left. Like, you're around the same age as me, like the Occupy movement and the anti WTO stuff. Like if you remember the movie Zeitgeist, it was kind of a weird movie, but it's very left coded at the time. And I rewatched it for a podcast recently, and it's very right coded now. So, very long winded answer of saying like there's definitely people who um, were very critical of it, and I think a lot of them have been kind of muscled out.
yeah. Do you think that that's maybe changing now? Do you think that they are going to be welcomed back into the fold? And I mean, the way that I see it is that things are going to be like environmentalism is going to come back in a big way. The poster Lomas actually made this point today also on Twitter that we're going to see a resurgence of climate concern. I won't call it hysteria, but that has been kind of not really a huge part of the conversation for the last, I don't know, 5 years or more. And identity politics took center stage, and basically the theory is that identity politics is petering out so quickly that they need something else to rally around, and they can't rally around any kind of economic populism that would actually help people, because now that's right coded, and so it's going to be environmentalism, and there's going to be some big catastrophe associated with this resurgent El Nino or whatever it is. I haven't read too deeply as to what's coming, but
I could see that.
Yeah.
I would, especially in the context of like anti-data centers, which I mean, I'm far from an expert, but I'm also not a novice. I work in the tech world, and I've even like worked in data centers and did a little bit of design. Like the environmental impact of data centers is pretty seriously overstated by the most, I'll use your term that I wouldn't really disagree with, the most hysterical ends of that coalition. I'm, more concerned with the economic impact myself. Like, there's no reason my power bill should go up because, there's a data center in the area, but that's neither here nor there. But I could see that happening. I think they do like a very roundabout economic populism. Um, but they kind of shot themselves in the foot by kind of neutering Bernie and whatnot. But I could see like an environmental resurgence, although that feels pretty anemic. Maybe it'll get an extra set of an extra wind with the anti-data center and anti-tech thing. Since out of curiosity, I'm to take it back to you with the tech and data center and AI thing. I feel like so there's an alternate reality where like the lefties were the anti-vaxxers if Trump had handled things a little bit differently. And kind of
Yeah.
I feel like
There was a window of a couple of days there
yeah.
where
Well,
they straight up were
you're
anti-vax.
old enough to like me to remember like that type of thing used to be lefty coded, but all that to say, like I feel like there is if things had shook down, like if it weren't for like Elon and some of these tech people going right, I feel like they would have been like, well, AI is, it's helping right historical wrongs and it's democratic and, it helps people with disabilities. And if you're against people using AI to make art, you're ableist. Like, I feel like that could have easily played into their hands, but they seem to be very hardcore anti-AI and anti-tech right now.
Yeah, the anti-AI contingent of the left feels extremely dorky to me.
It's
Uh,
like people who are like, oh, I just want coffee flavored coffee, or like people who are mad at auto-tune. Like, did you see that essay that Sam Chris did that went
the
around?
one about AI writing?
Yeah, it was like, I'm gonna kill you if you use AI writing. And
Yeah, yeah.
to me, it felt like the literary equivalent of like somebody smacking you with a person going, you brute, you brute, you brute.
I mean, I think aesthetically, I that post resonated with me in terms of just
Hmm.
how I feel inundated with slop like everybody else,
Yeah.
and so like I think that that's certainly something to care
Hmm.
about. But
It's
you know,
just not that big of a deal to me.
yeah, broadly speaking, AI is it's just going to happen. It's inevitable.
Hmm.
And B, I think people get carried away into thinking that it's more of a threat than it actually is. Like I see it as basically like just extremely powerful statistical analysis, and
Hmm.
it's going to change a lot. Like it's certainly going to have a massive impact on life. Like it probably it'll change life as much as the internet changed life. But I don't see that this inevitable apocalypse that certain people seem to see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, already there's I forgot if you can say or not say, do you work vaguely in the tech world? Or do you not want to say?
Sorry, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I just accidentally unplugged my microphone.
No
Um,
problem.
so yes, I do work in tech, and I have a tangential relationship with. I'm not an AI researcher or anything like that, but I keep a close watch on it.
Yeah, all that to say, because I do as well. Like, they're already walking a number of things back. I mean, again, like, to me, the bigger worry is they're going to use that as an excuse to offshore. Um, but
Yeah.
again, that's a separate conversation. All that to say, as far as with the tech cultural thing goes, I feel like being anti-tech and anti-AI is short term. Like, you might get the clicks, your Sam Chris's and whatnot. And I'm aggressively ambivalent about AI since like I said, I work in the tech world. It's super useful. It's better Google. I I feel aggressively ambivalent about it, but I think as a long-term strategy, I don't think it's going anywhere. Um, but I don't know. I guess we'll see. I have one more thread I wanted to get to you if you have the time.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads me tangentially to because you're talking about what it was like growing up and how you feel like the cultural winds have shifted pretty significantly. So I'm in my mid 30s, so I'm probably around the same age as you, and I've definitely noticed it as well. But you had that really, really great article that made me, see you as a great writer as well, like on the millennial snot thing. Um, I wonder if you wanted to talk about that article just a little bit, just kind of like as a framing device of like how millennials are aging culturally, as well as like how that plays into the broader conversation of what we've been talking about today.
Yeah. So I can give a little bit of a review of what that was all about for the listeners. Millennial Snot and it was really two articles that were kind of companion pieces. Millennial Snot is a convergence of smarm and snark. Liberal snark is when you're talking to someone online and trying to have a polite conversation, and they start clapping back at you like a snotty teenage girl. And I traced the history of that all the way back to Jon Stewart's The Daily Show, or the kind of heyday of The Daily Show, where it became more important to own conservatives than to have any kind of dialogue with them. And this actually was a very powerful weapon that I think over time had diminishing returns and actually is working against the left, because this register of millennial snot that a lot of them indulged in over the last decade is now it's now so common and so degraded that a guy like me can come along and observe it and write an article about it. Smarm is the tendency to be like, how dare you, sir? It's civility politics. It's to basically respond to a genuine criticism with a, how could you be so coarse as to
How dare you,
confront
sir?
me about this thing that I'm doing? And snot I see as like, it's kind of doing both at the same time. It's being very sanctimonious, but also very like shitty and kind of snippy with people. And in the article, I basically argue that like this is how liberals talk, and this is how, you go on Twitter and you see these like professors talking in this way, clapping back and talking like drag queens and teenagers and like sassy black ladies. And then the second article that was kind of the sequel to that was about kind of like how the professional managerial class, like overeducated white liberals, geeks, really, like a lot of like geek culture shifted to be the defining feature of the left in the US, or at least the lib left. And so now a lot of the like prominent figures that are like going to carry the Democratic Party forward are these types of people, these kind of like soy boy types. Sorry, what was your original question? I've summarized the article, but forgetting what you were asking.
No, that I was just kind of getting you to frame the article, since I think that about how like millennials are aging, and kind of how it speaks to that cultural moment, since I think that's kind of a good primer for that question, since I think like I remember seeing, like, for example, there was an interview where Zoran Mamdani was like, "Oh, I like hip hop music." But like, "Oh my God, he likes hip hop." It's like, it's kind of like, "Oh, so you like pop music?" It's like if somebody says they like Marvel, now it's like, "Oh, so you like movies?" It's that kind of edgy, pseudo edgy countercultural affectation that was edgy maybe a generation or two ago.
It's kind of like the Hillary Clinton I keep a hot sauce in my purse thing.
Yeah.
They're pandering to young people.
But young people who are in their 40s now. That's
Right,
the other
right. Like the notorious RBG thing comes to mind, like the
oh God.
positioning. I remember, I think it was one of the Chapo Trap House guys who was just like, imagine how Ruth Bader Ginsburg must feel. This is like before she died. Like, imagine how she must, maybe it was Matt Christman, loathe this like notorious RBG like branding that the libs have given her, where she's like, she probably would not even know what to think if you played like a Biggie song to her.
Well, considering
Anyway,
her original, if I'm sure you know that the essay from back in the 60s of why she supported abortion, maybe her feelings would not be very politically correct these days, as we would say.
Did you see the clip of what's her name, the black Supreme Court justice?
Ketanji Jackson or something?
Yeah, she did like a Shakespeare thing, but it was not like a traditional Shakespeare. It was like Shakespeare for millennials, where they're saying, they're using like modern day slang, in the production. She did this like a year ago. It was, well into her tenure as a Supreme Court justice, but it was one of those like, theater kid occupied government moments for sure.
Yeah, there's something that's very, very off-putting to that. Although it's maybe just me, my particular aesthetic taste, I suppose. Maybe I'm temperamentally conservative like that. Even, back when I was going to my family is very Christian. I always hated like the New American Standard version of the Bible too, for that same reason. Just,
No, I mean, I
a
think
little
that,
bit too contemporary for me.
not to deny your lived experience, but I think that young people in their 20s now look at millennial snot and millennial humor more generally, and the tendency that millennials have to want to make politics cool, and to make their politicians seem like down with the latest whatever slang and memes. I think that they find that revolting.
There's something very unbecoming about it.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I'm grateful that Trump has not, like, he doesn't even bother. Like, you can go back and watch George Bush do that like goofy little dance he does with those Africans. Do you remember this?
Vaguely.
And Obama did it too, and all politicians do it. They all pander, but Trump doesn't. Like, I don't think he's congenitally capable of pandering in that way. Like, you would never see him do like I guess he did SNL that one time. But apart from that, I can't think of him.
Well, that was before politics, right? Or am I remembering that he go back on?
No, he did do it once when he was running.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry, my alarm went off. But yeah, he did do it one time. But apart from that, like, he definitely doesn't like play the game in a way that often results in those like cringeworthy moments that you see.
Yeah, there was well, I mean, there's no denying, even if you can't
Pokemon
stand,
go to the polls. It's
yeah,
like, you don't hear Trump saying
Trump
that
would
kind of
never. I mean, and take this with a grain of salt, since I didn't vote for the guy, but even if you can't stand the guy, you can't deny he's, I would say, probably genius level at like media manipulation. He just has like a natural, he's been in the media for 40, 50 years, that that in the 2016, like, like a dangerous Donald, if you were president, blah blah blah, and then you just, without missing a beat, because you'd be in jail, like, perfect comedic timing. There's no denying that.
Yeah.
It's a little less funny now, when when there's like wars and stuff, but
Yeah, I often wonder if it's a conscious choice that he makes to be the way that he is, or if it's innate, like if it just comes naturally. Because I think you could say something similar about like a Joe Rogan, for example. Like, he's never struck me as a particularly bright guy, but he has some kind of juice that makes him compelling to people. And I think Trump is similar in that, like, in some ways it's almost a lack of like intelligence, or maybe verbal intelligence, to where, like, he obviously wouldn't hold a candle to an Obama when it comes to like I think if you were to make them take some sort of test, some sort of aptitude test, Obama would trounce Trump. But Trump just has this like instinctual ability to say the needed thing at the right moment that I've never seen in any other politician.
Yeah, he's incredibly media savvy, and in a way that's very, like, kind of to your earlier point, it's very anti Pokemon Go to the polls, very anti Jon Stewart, in a way that I think, there's a lot of reasons that
He can't even say what his favorite Bible verse is. Like, even just
that man has obviously never read the Bible.
Right, like even
I love them all.
Like Obama or Hillary, who I can't imagine are serious about Bible study. They would be able to fake it, is my point.
Yeah,
Like they could. I'm sure that Obama could pull something out of his ass
yeah. Well, he
and
probably has it memorized, like the whole Bible for
and he could
cynical.
talk for an hour about it,
Yeah.
coherently and compellingly.
Well, it's like the meme of memorizes it versus understands it intuitively.
Yeah.
But no, it is again. It's just so many funny moments like that. Those are my top 10 Trump moments of like what's your favorite Bible verse? Oh, they're all great. Old or New Testament, love them both.
Yeah, I do worry that whoever his successor ends up being is just never going to.
JD Vance has little to no juice, unfortunately. I think.
Well, he's good. He's quick on his feet. I'll give him that.
Yeah.
And I think
he's kind of millennial cringe, though. I will say.
Well, certainly compared to Trump.
Yeah.
But I would
just on an aesthetic level, at least to me, he would say some Pokemon Go to the pole style shit. I think that's kind of the thing. Like JD Vance's, and again, like putting their policies aside, like I would put him in the same category as what was that lady from California who
Katie Porter?
Katie Porter, who just like snapped at people. Like honestly, I feel like maybe that will be the next wave of like authenticity, or people who like will not try to be authentic. Like, yeah, I'm a politician, I'm important, I've got shit to do. If you get in front of my shot, I'm throwing something at you. I think JD Vance should lean into
the steaming potatoes are coming down upon your head.
Yeah, be
do
weird.
You know that story?
No.
This is real. Katie Porter had her ex-husband alleged that she dumped like boiling hot mashed potatoes on him on his head. You can look that up. That's a real
that's so funny. And that's what I think JD Vance would do well to lean into that. Like and I say this again without judgment. Like he's clearly like a sociopath, just like, because I know people who come from that background. If you come out of that going to Harvard and starting businesses and going to politics, you have something in you that most other people don't. You're like a cold-blooded sociopath, single-minded, incredibly competent. Lead into that. Don't do this like, millennial snark, like, that like very corny ass tweet he did, like, because that was a joke. I think he probably posted that screenshot of like the two JD Vance tweets are like, the blood of warriors is closer to God than the tears of priests or whatever. And like, so there's a Chihuahua and a Great Dane who had a puppy, and I've got questions. Like, lean into being a weirdo if you're gonna win, because that millennial cringe shit is I don't think that's gonna do him any favors.
Yeah, certainly not if he's going up against literally any lib that's got a shot right now that I can think of who will do that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Newsom, or people are saying AOC. I think it's going to be, again, without getting too into the inside baseball of politics, I think the Iran thing is going to hurt them pretty badly. And I think it's going to be pretty easy for the Democrats to lay it up. That having been said, they're very good at snatching defeat from the jaws of victory.
Well, I haven't heard any real rhetoric about that up to date, like
Iran, or
negative, trying to attack Trump on the basis of his foolish, leadership. There's certainly like a lot of people are critiquing his approach, but not the fact that it's actually he went to war.
Yeah,
I feel like it's harder for liberals to do that because of the last 20 years of warmongering that they've participated in. But it seems like, I don't know. Do you think I'm wrong on that?
No, I would agree. I think the leadership class wants that war no matter what.
It was probably going to happen regardless.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, with you're old enough to remember as well, like with the Iraq and Iran thing, nobody really criticized Bush for going to war. It's like, how dare you, sir? You didn't fill out the right paperwork, and that's the real crime.
Right. I mean, I'm hearing more about like the reflecting pool and the ballroom.
which annoys me more as somebody who's still even tangentially connected to the left, annoys me more than you could ever know. Like, who gives a shit? It's
And it'll be
like
some new
unseasonably
stupid
hot.
thing that doesn't matter, and
Yeah.
next week.
Well,
I
again, that's the weird thing that like Tucker Carlson is doing more to hold Trump's feet to the fire and has been consistently, criticizing, our unquestioning support of. I remember years back when the Ukraine thing was popping off. It was one of those first times I was like, wait, am I agreeing with Tucker Carlson of like, let's not just give a blank check to support this war. Hey, maybe Russia's a big, powerful country. Maybe let's cool our jets. Let's do this diplomatically. And I was like, wait, really? I'm agreeing with that guy? Because the last time I had seen Tucker Carlson was, to allude to what you were saying earlier, the Jon Stewart thing was the last time he'd kind of been in my consciousness. And
when he was still
now
wearing the bow tie.
when he was being a jobber, to use the wrestling term.
I really don't know what to make of Tucker.
Do you think
You
he's
know,
for real? Or
I don't know. I think like you, I agree with a lot of what he has to say. And I don't know if he believes in anything. It does seem like has a good ability to kind of stake out new territory
yeah,
and occupy it and own it. So
Tucker's
maybe
weird
that's what he's doing now.
because I mean, on one hand, he will say things that are, substantive criticisms of, um, his past as a neocon and supporting all these wars and criticizing the United States relationship with Israel or Ukraine. And then he'll say some shit about aliens and, all this other nonsense that I can't tell if he's just like a slop merchant or if he's like a well poisoner, like I would say, there's no such thing as ex-gay and there's no such thing as ex-CIA. Um, and
You think he was really clawed by demons?
I don't, I think the more important question is, do you think Tucker thinks he got clawed by demons?
Right.
Um, that I couldn't say. I mean, again, that's maybe left of field and or would be another whole conversation that could be another hour or two of, the degree to which there's controlled opposition and the media is purposely being pushed in certain directions and seeding certain conversations and poisoning the well. I think you could make three different compelling arguments about Tucker Carlson, at least to me. Like, broadly speaking, he's like still a neocon and he's poisoning the well on some of these, reasonable criticisms on, say, the United States relationship for Israel. On the other far end, he's a defector, like a true America first, like, what the dissident right in J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel, that faction is supposed to be of let's just, you know, try to keep things within America. We've overextended ourselves. He's a total slot merchant and just, says what he thinks he has to get views or, some combination thereof. It's really hard to tell with him.
Yeah, I couldn't say it more plainly and clearly than that.
If you had to gun to your head though, like if you had to pick a faction, what do you think?
I'm kind of a cautious plan truster.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the most important thing that needs to happen in the U.S. is immigration controlled and minimized, and we need to verify how how votes are counted. So save Act. And I think if Trump could do those two things, he would be the greatest president in my lifetime, maybe ever.
Mm-hmm.
But those things are. I don't know how we can have a country without those things taken care of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's another of those things that like that's you're a terrible far right racist conservative for saying something that like that's what Obama ran on in 2012. So it's unfortunately it's a constantly moving goalpost. And at least for me, like I was really pumped about reshoring and because I think the proverbial boomer uncle who said like the real problem in this country is we don't make things anymore. I think your proverbial Uncle Buck has been vindicated time and time again. And I think we need to have actual manufacturing. Um, and if you could do that, for example, and I've heard kind of mixed things on how well that's going, but some of that stuff, like okay, I'm not a fan of Iran, as I've said, probably arguably too much about. But if you can make that happen, or rather, I think it's usually more accurate to say the administration can make something like that happen. I would be, tenuously open to voting, Republican in the future. But right now, it just seems like it's kind of a incoherent mix of all these other different factions that are vying for whatever's going to be the future of the Republicans.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if this all just collapses when Trump dies, because he was kind of like the charismatic figure holding it all together. So there's examples of that happening in history. But I'd like to think that kind of groundswell of interest in this new vision of what the right can be is enough to keep the momentum going.
Well, for better or for worse, if somebody like you who's more conservative, it's probably more of a white pill for the lefties amongst my audience, probably more of a black pill. But I think these material interests and these cultural coalitions don't go anywhere. I mean, Nixon was arguably the one who represented it best before Trump, but like I think this coalition is only going to be growing in the future. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the only other thing I was going to say is that I think it's going to be a more inclusive party, a more inclusive movement in the future, and I'm curious to what that's going to look like. Just as we saw, like more and more demographics supporting Trump on the Republicans. Basically, the only ground he lost was with like old white liberals.
Yeah, I don't know. A loud, like internet-based faction of young guys who are into, Tucker and Rogan and the podcast spheres, as they're called. So it's not just the old white liberals, but it's hard for me to believe that that's not just amplified by being online as much as I am, and that maybe that doesn't represent a serious constituency in the real world.
Yeah. I mean, that's just kind of what I've seen from polling more broadly. And I don't know, I think we're in the middle of a realignment, as we've seen, a number of different times in United States history, that what it's going to look like, I don't know. I think kind of whoever can grab, what you're describing earlier is this like, this populist energy, whoever can harness that, I think owns the future. And more importantly, whoever can offer a vision of normalcy, I think is what people want more than anything at this point. I think that's kind of who owns the future. But at this point, like, I don't know who's going to be worse off without Trump, Republicans or Democrats.
That's a good question. I do not have an answer. I don't think anybody does.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see, as 2026 will probably be a good barometer, and we'll check in after that. But I think we're probably coming to the end of our time here. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Not really. I guess just that I'm trying to think of what I would say to your audience in particular.
It's pretty mixed bag.
But I think that there are probably people listening that would take a look at the content that I aggregate in my Substack, the Newright Post, and be kind of horrified by it. But maybe go back and like look at the every year I do like a top reads of the year, where I think there's like 30 essays for 2025, 2024, and 2023. So if you're curious and you're wanting to know more and you have an open mind about what the other side thinks, you really can't do worse than perusing those end of year posts, which are pretty easy to find. I think I have a tab on the Substack that says like best of or something like that collects all those.
Mm-hmm. And the millennial snot one is really good. That I think is a great entry point for your writing on its own. I definitely recommend that to the audience.
Yeah, Millennial Snot, that actually ran at someone else's blog, NS Lions. But if you Google Millennial Snot, you'll be able to find it.
Okay, cool. Do you have any other specific plugs or promotions you want to tell the audience about?
No, just follow me on Twitter, Newright Post, and same with Substack. Every week in your inbox, aggregated content. There's actually a number of prominent lib thinkers that follow and subscribe, and I like to think that they see it as a way to keep an open mind and get a sense of what the other side is thinking.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's definitely you'll get a laugh if you have maybe a stronger stomach, I think. But Dudley, I want to appreciate you coming on and say thanks. I want to ask you the ending question I always ask my guests as a sign off. What's something that makes you feel hopeful or optimistic for the future?
Well, I already talked a lot about my optimism. I'll say something in a completely different tack, which is just my family and my kids in particular. I think that a lot of what moved me into the political place that I am now is wanting to have a better world for my kids, and realizing that, we talked earlier about, or you were mentioning about this like public safety thing being like incomprehensible to you, why someone would think that it's like inherently fascist to just want to have like a safe, functional community. But now that I'm a family man myself, it's brought home to me in a much more real way that I don't think I really realized when I was a single guy in the city, and I didn't experience like the downsides of that like fraying social contract and like low trust environment. But I think that seeing all the people around me in our sphere that are trying their best to like make it happen for themselves, to raise families, I feel optimism that that's happening.
Well, I think that's a great sentiment and a great note to end it on. So, Dudley, thanks again for coming on. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you, PJ.
All right, well, we'll take it easy.